As you can see, it can take the time of a coffee break or less to become a victim of malware or ransomware. As many businesses across the UK and around the world saw earlier this year with WannaCry, as you can see on the screens around here, or more recently with NotPetya. And although this is simply a visual effect, Matt's very keen that I point out that McLaren are absolutely fine. They haven't been hacked during the coffee break. This is just to make it a bit more exciting when you come back in. The continued explosion of ransomware is unrelenting, as is the varying nature of the threats that we face. From criminals wanting to take money or steal our data, through an ever-professionalising ransomware market and ever-advancing social engineering tools and social engineering bots, to hacktivists wanting to disrupt the way that you work, or script-kiddies simply wanting to have a name for themselves, or potentially being caught in the crossfire of state actors looking to have a range of effects on a global scale, affecting power grids or industrial control systems, software used across a range of countries, as we saw in NotPetya. And this is through well-resourced campaigns, where the end game isn't often clear, but they won't mind if you're caught in the crossfire. As George mentioned earlier, when we were talking about the value of data and how valuable it is to organizations, I completely agree. But as we've seen recently with Equifax, a data breach can be a real problem for you. And that means that the data that we hold in our enterprises is both an asset and a liability, and we should treat it as such. We should therefore think through the data that we have and how it flows around our organizations, who is accessing it, as we heard in the panel earlier. We should understand really what's normal and what is not. This means we need to have an integrated and adaptive approach to cybersecurity, and we should consider the human element as well as the technical element when we're creating controls around the way that we manage our cybersecurity. During our panel today, we're going to explore how we can use technologies to make security as invisible as possible, and investigate how we can create depth in our security, as well as embracing the secure by design principles that you can read about in ATM in the packs. Now, before we dive into the panel, as you saw in the previous session, it's now my turn to host Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? So if you can all please pay attention to the screens in front of you, can we have question 1, please? What percentage of medium and large UK businesses have had a data breach in the last 12 months? Please vote now. And unsurprisingly, for an IT audience, we have the answer correct. It is 66%. And I think that's an interesting figure because it means that it's a significant enough threat that the majority of businesses should worry about it. But like I tried to do with my red lights and ransomware screens, we shouldn't be too afraid. It's not an insurmountable problem. It's something that we can grasp and we can deal with, as we'll continue to explore as we go through the panel. So for round 2, if Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, please, can we have the second question? How prepared are you and your organization for GDPR? Please vote now. Just under half of you have a plan and are progressing well, which again, for an IT audience, you would kind of hope that you're aware of GDPR. There's a couple of people who don't know what it is, so hopefully we can cover that off in the session as well. There's 3% who are fully compliant, and maybe you want to ask me a question when we get to the Q&A at the end, but I don't think anyone can ever be compliant with GDPR, especially not yet, given that the ICO haven't released guidelines around how half of it's going to be implemented. So now I'd like to invite the panelists up onto the stage, please. We're just going to go around and let the panelists introduce themselves. So
good afternoon, my name's Pravesh Kara. I am one of the founders and head of cyber at Perspective Risk. Our aim is to try and make the gap between the attacker and defender as small as possible. We hope to provide services to you to ensure that we give you visibility and give you the response capabilities to tackle the threats and vulnerabilities you face on a day-to-day basis.
My name's Oscar O'Connor. Predominantly, I'm here as the Chief Information Security Officer for TrackBack. We try and plug the leads generated by manufacturers, car manufacturers, marketing spend with the dealerships who then sell the cars. Pre-TrackBack days, you could normally expect maybe 5 to 10% of such leads to be followed up effectively. with TrackBack in place, it's now nearer the 95% mark. So I think we're earning our money.
Hi, I'm Tim Orchard. I'm head of pre-sales for cyber and financial crime for BA Systems from EMEA. So myself and my team mostly work with our clients in designing the right fit solutions for their cybersecurity needs.
Hi everybody, good afternoon. Henry Sutton, I'm responsible for geosecurity in Europe. We help companies protect themselves from the most obvious sort of attacks through passwords or vulnerable devices, so companies like Facebook, Uber, Spotify, fast-growing companies.
Hi everyone, Dan Schlossberg, Director of Product Marketing at Mimecast. Mimecast delivers cybersecurity and cyber resilience services to help companies protect themselves and their business and the information that they hold.
The first question that we're going to explore on the panel is, how is the threat landscape that we have today, how is it evolving? And what impacts are you seeing across UK businesses from your various perspectives?
I think generally it's been accepted now that 2017 is the year of ransomware, and I think that's sector agnostic, as we've seen around the world. When we look at cybersecurity, a lot of us immediately think around confidentiality breaches and things to stop that happening, encryption. It's really interesting how the rise of ransomware has kind of swung that around, and it's pushing the basis back onto other things like availability and integrity of data. And a really important thing to remember when we're looking at cybersecurity is to think about all of those three things in a security context. And that our security controls like encryption can be used against us. I think the other thing that's really important is it's helped provide a better linkage to board level risk, because ransomware is really easy to quantify in terms of loss of data and business interruption. So it's pushing cybersecurity back up the board agenda. So that's really quite important as well. I guess from the perspective of looking at other threats, I think another really key thing that's been realized, something that in the penetration testing industry we've hypothesized about for many years, is supply chain threat. The Cloud Hopper campaign that was perpetrated this year, it got a lot less press than WannaCry, but it is just as important in terms of the potential impact of that globally. For anyone who doesn't know, Cloud Hopper is a breach by a nation-state actor of a number of IT service providers into their networks, using them specifically to be able to leverage the compromise of multiple customers. I think we'll see more of that. So as service providers ourselves, we need to be really cognizant about how important we are in defending our clients.
All of our companies are growing like crazy. Why are they growing like crazy? Because hacking's become a commodity. Anybody can do it. You can go and hire a hacker for $1,000 to go and pick on somebody or a company. What we see is that it affects everybody, whether you're the biggest company out there, so the biggest bank with huge resources, right down to the smallest. And most companies don't have the resources to know where to start to protect themselves. So many companies out there don't have a CISO. They have an IT staff trying to help them. They're being forced or going into the cloud because it makes good sense. Their users are adding applications across the board. Often they're open source with hundreds of vulnerabilities. So yeah, I think the landscape is tough if you're a medium-sized business trying to grow quickly, meet the demands of the user, and not be hacked.
The one thing that has stayed the same for quite a long time now is that in terms of getting into an organization, attackers are continuing to use the one app which is pretty pervasive across all of our businesses, which is email. Still accounts for over 90% of all successful breaches. That hasn't changed, but what we have seen change is the tactics that attackers are using. So it's moved from sort of quite simple tactics where traditional security defenses would be able to detect and stop them to very sophisticated and clever attacks, for example, using social engineering, where attackers really do their homework. It's less of a broad-based attack. It's increasingly targeted to specific companies and even specific individuals in those companies. So we're seeing those types of attacks grow more and more, and that's not just us. I mean, I think the FBI put out some stats a short while ago which said that those types of impersonation or sort of spoofing attacks have led to over $5 billion in losses already. So it's something that's very prevalent, and we're certainly seeing that. Organizations, and the conversation we have with our customers is it's got to be a two-pronged approach. You've got to have the right technology, but at the same time, what social engineering is exploiting are us, as humans as employees, as individuals. So you've got to come at it from both the angle of the employee and education and vigilance, as well as the right technology.
In terms of that importance of user experience, Henry, how are you seeing this materialize itself in the way that you think about design and the way you think about interactions and the way that you engage with other services to make sure that they're secure?
Yeah, I think when most people think about security, they think about it slowing down what they're doing, getting in the way, making it more complex, carrying multiple things around to prove who you are. Security's job really is to get out of the way, I think. Do it quickly and get out of the way and let somebody get on with the job. One of the first sets of hires we had were design consultants to make sure whatever we designed was really easy to use. Whether it's a lawyer who's in his 30th year of practicing law and wants a token to secure who they are, right through to some millennial who wants all the apps in the cloud and wants to use their Android device. So you've got to make it fit for purpose, fit for the job, but then quickly get out of the way when somebody's proved who they are and that they're secure.
What makes Mimecast different, and one of the things that I talk about is the user experience. So, for example, seamlessly embedded into the app that most of us use on a daily basis, probably far too much, which is Outlook. Being able to deliver continuous email availability, for example, even if your Exchange server or 365 is offline for a period of time, and doing that in a way that is virtually seamless to the user.
I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges, particularly as we move more into the cloud. The slides this morning about joining up with the ladders between the clouds. The same is true when you look at the security lens of a business, and being able to get a single picture of what's going on across your organization from users and applications and data is one of the biggest challenges at the moment. I mean, there's a lot of people pushing technology very, very hard. It's very important that when they're bringing those products to market, that they do support the right security controls and triggers underneath, because if they do, you can put in place proper holistic solutions that do sit seamlessly in the background. The challenge when you're trying to be agile with technology is if it isn't quite ready for the prime time from a security perspective, you layer over the top restrictive controls that then reduce your ability to do business and then fire up shadow IT, and then you end up in a bit of a problem. So doing things at the right pace with the right kind of technology that's geared up for security is the best way to make security transparent.
In the early days of security technology, when the firewall was king, there was a kind of consensus of belief that if you protected the boundary, everything would be fine. Because, of course, only people trusted have access within the boundary. The growth of secure bandwidth, cloud services, the explosion of applications mean effectively there is no boundary. They're designed by people, they're implemented by people, people will know how to get around them. But this sort of explosion of stuff all happening together means that we have now the ability to build security controls and monitoring controls into the things we use all the time. There is a very good chance that you will eliminate a huge percentage of potential access breaches. Beyond which the user experience is, well, I've signed on, I'm fine, I can access anything I like. Doesn't matter whether I'm in the office, doesn't matter whether I'm at home or an aircraft or an airport. The miscreant is probably the most creative person in this problem. We're constrained by morality and ethics and money, which your average state actor and your average organised criminal group are not. The implication of legislation like GDPR is we need to improve the security of what we do. We need to think more about who owns the stuff, the data that we capture. We need to think more about whether we really need to have it. And if we don't really need to have it, get rid of it. I think that's a huge breakthrough in terms of education, because we can talk to people in organizations about the problem that they have when they give their data to somebody else, including their employer.
PII, or personally identifiable information, is essentially just a subset of information, which means any organization that has a security posture means they're kind of already leaning towards compliance for GDPR. So as long as they're doing things about preventing attacks, they've thought about it and put in the correct controls. They have the controls in place to ensure that they can detect any attacks going on. And also, not every scenario can be thought about, so they also need to think about how they're going to respond to that as well, and have a plan in place to do so.
knowing exactly what you need to do in order to be compliant with GDPR is a very tricky task. And I think providing that people are understanding the things that we've been talking about today and making sure that they're building security controls and security awareness into their staff and their processes and their systems, you're a long way along the path of being able to demonstrate that you're doing the right things. Being able to evidence that and to be able to make sure that the other things, around, as Oscar spoke about, around consent are well considered.
Fundamentally, the thing that makes the biggest difference, and we keep saying the word over and over again, is people. Creating the right kind of security culture in all of your people, ownership of the problem, is one of the best defenses that you've got. They are the first line of defense. Machine learning is fantastic, but people's brains are still better at spotting anomalous behavior and calling it out than technology today. So we should leverage it.
What it boils down to is 6 principles. And if you can demonstrate in the event of going to a tribunal that you have applied those 6 principles reasonably, sensibly, consistently across your domain, you have a viable defence. And I think it's worth kind of looking at it from that, rather than going down to clause 17.3.c, saying, have we got a control that meets that obligation in its entirety? Look at those 6 principles. Are we doing things legally? Are we doing things reasonably? And that's the way TrackBack has approached compliance to GDPR. The other implication of it is that a breach is, in GDPR terms, is not simply now limited to somebody stealing something of yours or you losing something. It includes misuse.
Is being in the cloud more risky than keeping your systems on premise, given the impact for disruption is much greater?
I think the perimeter's dead, so on-premise is inherently not safe anyway. And when you've got companies like Amazon and Google and Microsoft putting all their resource to protecting it and all their reputation, I don't think it's less safe. I think you have to be careful and sensible, but you do on-premise as well.
Do we think organizations will be able to stay ahead of the threat actors that we discussed earlier on?
Never. They're always a step ahead of us. As I mentioned earlier, we are the perpetual underdog. We will always be behind their creativity. Ultimately, what we need to do is just make that gap between the attacker and the defender as small as possible. And we do that by getting greater visibility into what they're doing. Some of the incidents that I've investigated this year, the threats used no malware. There was no exploitation. It was pure social engineering. And had they had something like targeted threat protection from Mimecast, it would have completely nullified the exploit attempt.
I think Prav's right, but I think you also need some introspection as well. I mean, you need to know how big a target you are. So you need to look at your organization, look at your digital footprint, look at what makes you attractive to an attacker, whether they want to attack you, your customers, or they've just got an exploit that they're just looking to see who's vulnerable on the internet. So looking at your digital profile and understanding how you defend against attacks that might utilize that against you.
We do open source intelligence assessment and we look at the external IP ranges of companies and that gives you that footprint that an attacker is going to look for. So then you're understanding what it is that you are trying to defend.
When we're all running systems more on premises, generally took a defense in depth perspective. For me, that absolutely remains critical. A lot of organizations, are moving to cloud. They're moving, their productivity to, systems to the cloud, whether it's Google or Microsoft or others. And the temptation is to say, well, actually, here's a big company. Surely they're going to give me the best protection. But I guess from an attacker's point of view, the fact that they are creative, the other thing that they look at is, well, if I know that this organization is only using one level of defense or from one organization defending their company, that's going to be actually easier for them to get through. Whereas if there are multiple layers like there have been in the past and there should continue to be in the future, as we all move increasingly to the cloud, that will deliver a better level of defense.
Making sure that we have defense in depth whilst we're thinking around secure by design to make sure that we're linking together all of these different systems and disparate systems that we have in the cloud is the only way we can make sure that we're really defending ourselves going forward. And on that note, we're going to have to wrap up. So thank you very much.